Hello, everybody, and welcome to August Ask an Expert session. Today, we are very lucky to have Ken McCaw with us. I've had many comments. People have seen him in talks, at conferences, so we're quite lucky to have him today. As a reminder, the chat feature will be disabled, so any questions or comments that you have, please do put them into the Q&A, and we will address those at the end. As an organization committed to champion equity and empowering ability, we recognize the systemic inequities that stem directly from past wrongdoings, and we commit to respecting and working towards reconciling this history of injustice. In the spirit of reconciliation, March of Dimes Canada acknowledges we are gathered on customary and traditional lands of Indigenous peoples of the territory. I acknowledge that I am in Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and that the land on which I am working from is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically Garden River and Batchewana First Nations, as well as Métis people. I invite you to reflect on the land that supports your participation in this virtual space today, and I encourage you to move forward in reconciliation by reading and responding as you can personally to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendation. The content of today's presentation is not intended to be substituted for medical, legal, or other professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For medical questions or issues, please seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers. The opinions expressed in the presentation today are those of the respective author and not necessarily those of March of Dimes Canada. March of Dimes Canada does not endorse any person, facility, or product mentioned in today's presentation. So, Ken grew up in a music family. His mother played the fiddle and many other instruments. Following in her footsteps, he too fell in love with music and is an accomplished guitarist. In late 2011, Ken had a stroke that affected his right side and speech. There was no movement in his arm. After 6 months, he was determined to start playing again. He used hope and positivity to find a new way to enjoy his passion. Ken now spreads this message at conferences, events, TV appearances, and charities all over. He participated in an awesome music project, which showcased 100 stories of Canadians, including artists such as Bare Naked Ladies, Chris Hadfield, Michael Bublé, and Sarah McLachlan, and how music made a difference in their lives. And without further ado, welcome, Ken.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. And hello to everybody that's out there. This is an amazing moment for me. When Cheryl reached out a while back and mentioned this opportunity, I just had to say yes. And saying yes has become a big part of my story. And you'll hear that as we go on today. What I'd like to do is, actually in 2 seconds, I'm going to start kind of talking about where this whole situation started for me. So in 2011, as Cheryl said, I was just doing my regular day, but I woke up feeling not that great. So I texted the guys at work saying, hey, I'm not going to be in today. See you tomorrow. And that's when it all started. I went back to sleep, woke up midday, and turns out on my way back from the washroom, I realized everything felt super weird. And that's the best way I can describe it, is super weird. And I realized that I didn't really have control over the right side of my body. So I used my hand to lean against walls and door frames and a dresser and everything I could to get back into bed, because getting back into bed felt like the right move. And I clearly didn't know what was going on, but it was bad. I thought, well, no one's home. I better call 911, which, seemed like a reasonable thing to do. The phone was right there on my bedside table, so I grabbed it. Called 911, and their response was fire, police, or ambulance. And I said ambulance in a very alarming way. It was kind of is the best I can think of it. My tongue didn't really work. I knew what I was trying to say. I knew what I wanted to say. It was enough. It sounded enough like ambulance that the person on the other end of the line immediately recognized what was going on. That set into motion that whole series of events, which, they were very good on the phone with me, kept me going, kept me engaged. And all of a sudden I realized when my wife left for work this morning, she would have locked the door. That means these paramedics are going to have to bash down the door to get into the house. And clearly, I'm having a bad day, but that was the first thing that occurred to me, is that I needed to get them into the house safely. So I managed to provide our garage access code to the 911 operator, and said, guys, if you go in through the garage, you can get into the house, everything will be cool. Again, one of those things in hindsight, why that would even matter to me in a moment as serious as that, I have no clue. Nonetheless, those paramedics showed up, and very kind, very professional, very cool. And they clearly knew what was going on, even though I didn't. They started doing the squeeze my hand, wiggle your toes, all these kind of assessments that would let them know exactly what they were dealing with. And it was alarming to think about moving my hand, my arm, my leg, and they just wouldn't do it. That had never happened in my life. We always just think about stuff and we do it. So that was kind of my first sign that things were not too cool. And so while they were talking away and we were doing our assessments, turned out everything on my right side turned back on again. My right arm started working, my right hand started working, my leg, I could lift it, I could wiggle my toes, I could do everything. And it felt like just, okay, that was just some weird brief blip, and now it's over and everything's going to be cool. So I ended up putting my arm around the paramedic's shoulders. They helped me down the stairs. We got out the front door. I locked the front door, like my wife did that morning, jumped on the stretcher in the driveway, and off we went to the hospital. I'm in the back of the ambulance. I text my wife saying, hey, wasn't feeling that great this morning. Some stuff's going on. So I'm just going to the hospital, kind of get checked out. Super casual, super nonchalant, as though it's no big deal, because it didn't feel like it was. It felt like it was over, and that was it. And, but when I arrived at the hospital, I realized they were viewing it a little more seriously than I was. My experience with emergency departments was, as a kid, you need stitches, or, a friend breaks their arm or their leg or something happens. And so you sit there and you wait for a little while, and then you're seen and things get taken care of. When I went in this time, it was straight to the front of the line. No waiting, no nothing. It's just like, Mr. McCaw, nice to see you. Please come this way. Like very, very, very just direct, and dealt with in a very serious manner. So I ended up going through their set of assessments. And while that was going on, all of a sudden, my right side turned off again. Arm, my speech, my tongue, my leg, my arm, like everything just turned off. And I was like, guys, it's happening again. We got to do something. And of course, they sprung into action. That series of events in that day led to 2.5 months in the hospital. And it was pretty significant stay. I went from being a regular guy in his late 40s with, what I see as a typical life. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't speak clearly, not because I didn't know the words or I couldn't imagine the words. It's just that my tongue, and half of my mouth, everything on this side just didn't work. Like didn't work. And so when I tried to make it work, only half of it came out, and it came out really garbled. That meant that I couldn't eat solid food because when your tongue and the inside of your mouth and everything else has no sensation, then there's a real chance of choking, of misplacing food in your mouth. And so all of a sudden, I am now no longer eating solid food. I'm no longer walking. I'm no longer sitting up on my own. I would lay down in bed, slide down, slide down, slide down, and wouldn't be able to lift myself back up again. I would have to ring the bell for the nurse to help me actually sit back up on my pillow in, a more comfortable position. So many things changed in that one moment. And I'm sure many of you out there have experienced this or known people that have experienced this. And it's a dramatic thing. We think of certain illnesses that kind of have a gradual decline where, you know, you lose a little bit of something one day or you're not quite so good at something the next day. But with a stroke, it's just right off a cliff. It's like you're fully capable and boom, nothing. And that's an odd situation. Like there's no way to be prepared to handle that kind of thing. And so for me, it was definitely an eye opener to say the least. The staff, the everybody at the hospital, I was in an integrated stroke unit and I was there for the full stay. And they were incredible. They've seen this before, they've done this before. Unfortunately, it's a more common thing. And they were fantastic. They worked with me with what capabilities I had and helped me add to that, add to that, add to that, just little bit by little bit. I'll say this. I realized in the early days, and I still do this to some extent now, that my goal setting became different. My goal setting was all about some tiny little incremental thing that I could gain this afternoon or tomorrow morning, or very, very short term goals, very, very small goals. And that to me started off this whole process, this whole journey the right way because I needed to feel those little accomplishments, no matter how small they were, rather than setting gigantic goals that may be achievable in the long term, but would be very frustrating in the short term. So I'll say that's one thing that just became evident to me very early on, that whatever I was learning, whether it was how to sit up in bed, how to transfer out of bed into a wheelchair, how to stand up from that wheelchair and what to hold on to and what not to hold on to, how to apply the brakes on my wheelchair before I got up. All these things that are brand new skills that I never had before, I had to learn them. And it's a long-term process and a long-term kind of personality, or not necessarily personality, but kind of way of thinking that shifted to this short-term, small goals, achievable goals that helped me through that whole stay. So I spent Christmas and New Year's and my 48th birthday in the hospital. And only towards the very end of that was I able to actually stand up, use a walker, and make a few steps on my own. After that, I would need to sit down, have a rest. Oh my gosh, we should talk about that. The fatigue that came along with this was something absolutely surprising. Any exertion, any new thing, any challenge meant that I would do that thing and then have a nap. I remember clearly in hospital, I would wake up, get ready for breakfast, then have breakfast, then I would need a nap. And then I would have some form of therapy in the morning, and then I would have a nap. And then lunch, everything was just super fatiguing. And even to this day, there's still some of that, not nearly as severe, but it still is a thing for me. It's fatigue was a surprising outcome. And just something to contend with. And it just became a normal part of my life. So now I know that when I do things, I've got to plan that rest time afterwards. I got to plan into my day, into my weekend, whatever I'm doing, that there has to be time for rest. Give me one moment. There also needs to be time for water. I drink an awful lot of water these days. So that being said, I'm in hospital. I finally get out and I'm home, and we've made some changes around the house that made it simpler for my level of mobility to work with everyday things around the house. We had some additional stairs put in going down into our garage with handrails on both sides. Another thing, handrails. When you've only got one hand to hang on with, they have to be on both sides. Or I had to adapt, in some cases, how I do stairs if there was only one handrail. Super unaware of that prior to stroke. Definitely an important thing now. But I got into a routine at home. I got comfortable with home, used to how things were, and started doing my outpatient rehab. And that's kind of probably the first significant place that I turned a corner, especially with regard to music. Because every day that I would meet with my OT, who was amazing, by the way, and if you have great stories to tell about OTs, man, I believe it. I would tell her every day, I want to play guitar again. I'm a guitar player. I want to play guitar again. And I would say that every day. And then we move on to other things that we didn't have a guitar there at therapy. So we would do other things. But every day I would repeat it that I want to get back to playing guitar again. And one day out of the blue, when I said that, she said, well, have you thought of any kind of one-handed guitar playing idea? And to be honest, I hadn't. I just presumed my right hand, my right arm would come back to full functionality and everything would be fine. I just have to wait a little while. But when she said that, it was the right thing to say to me at the right time. Because for me, I felt like, okay, she said this, and I can now work on that right now. It's not something I have to wait for my hand to get a certain level of capability back or anything else. I could actually start thinking about that right now because I have one hand, I have a guitar, and it really got my mind going. And I'll tell you, that moment made all the difference for me. And I didn't know what it would look like. She wasn't a musician. She didn't know what to recommend, only that maybe you can do something with one hand. But it made me, if I can have you think of one thing here, and it's the how you rephrase a goal. So if I had said to her, I want to play guitar just like I did for the last 30 something years, then that would have painted me into a corner of doing everything exactly the same with full capability and everything back to the way it was pre-stroke. That would have been a bad goal to set, to play guitar the way I used to. What my goal was is I want to make music with my guitar. A slight, subtle difference, but a huge difference nonetheless, because it means that in terms of approaching the guitar, I could just say, okay, I have 6 strings, I have a few fingers, I have a body I can tap on, I have different ways I can tune it, I have all kinds of things I can do. I just need to make music with this somehow. So I'll take a second out of talking just to give my voice a rest, and I'll show you a little bit of what that originally looked like. So I realized this hand had to do the role of both hands. Typically, any of you that play music or know guitar at all, this hand will play the note, and this hand will choose the note. And so now, this new way I have to play means that this hand has to do both of those things. And so I found one of the biggest things for me, and for those of you who are guitar players, you'll get this, I tuned it differently. Not that that will mean something to everybody, but what the lesson out of that was for me is that it doesn't have to be done the way you did it before. This way works for me, and it allows me to make a sound that sounds good to me. So I then could hit a string and let it go, and it would make sound, and that was workable. That started off sounding like music to me, and that was so encouraging. Even though I wasn't playing songs, I wasn't doing anything that was full on like, hey guys, listen to this, I'll do a song for you. It was something that was musical to me. So I started goofing around, and a little later on, I got to things like this. On the high strings, because they're easy to press, they're lighter, they're smaller, thinner. Then I worked on the low strings. They're kind of thicker and harder and a little bit stiffer to move. And it kind of went with like kind of fun, kind of neat, kind of getting those low notes going. Again, bit by bit, just kind of putting things together, making it a little more musical all the time. And then I got to playing other songs like again, so it started to sound more musical to me. But there's not a lot of music out there written for one-handed guitar. So I had to start writing my own things. And I'll play a little bit of one of those for you right now. It's a song called Best Foot Forward. I'll step back and explain that a little bit to you. There's a lot of expressions that we use in everyday life that all of a sudden had new meaning for me. Best foot forward, for instance. I literally have a best foot. I have a good left foot that does everything I want it to, and I have a right foot that requires some assistance and doesn't quite do everything. So when I hear best foot forward, again, an expression I've heard my whole life, it had a whole new meaning to me. And I kind of like that. So I'll just play, I won't play the whole song for you, but I'll play a little bit of what it sounds like. So it turns out there was something musical that could happen with this one hand. Didn't start that well, but another key moment in that whole development was maybe 6 months after getting out of the hospital. I had heard of a guitar player that I knew who was playing in Toronto at the time, and I wanted to go see him. And going to see a concert in a venue that's not really designed for accessibility was a bit of a challenge and an unknown. We could have got there and it may not have worked out and we would have had to leave. But it turned out with just enough assistance, with just enough, you know, making it happen, I got to go see this show. And the one guy I knew, the second person I didn't. And man, that second guy, not to discount anything about this first one, but there's a guy named John Gom on the roster that night. Guy from England who is just astounding. And he has this way of playing guitar that his left hand does a whole bunch of crazy stuff. His right hand is tapping out all over the guitar and making noises and tuning his guitar while he's playing. Just amazing stuff. And it was so musical and so inspirational to me because I thought, man, if I could just do what his left hand is doing, that would be musical enough for me. And it was one of those moments where I thought, yeah, I can actually make music that, let me take it back a bit. I didn't want people to go, oh, that's really good, for, considering that, you can only use one hand. I didn't want that kind of sympathy credit for what I was doing. To me, it had to get past my test of being musical enough. It just had to sound like music and be enjoyable as it was. No excuses. So having seen that show really, really got me fired up for what was coming next because I had been invited to speak at an event in Toronto. And so I had played in bands my whole life, but I'd always been kind of back of it. I wasn't the front guy. I wasn't the lead singer. And so speaking in front of a large audience in a convention center was a new thing for me. But I thought, I got to do this and I got to do it with my guitar and I got to write a song for that thing and I got to get good enough to play it so that people know that this thing that sounds kind of like it shouldn't be possible because, we only think of guitar as being a two-handed pursuit. And I thought, no, they got to see that it's doable another way. And so I worked like crazy and I got better and better and better because I had to make that deadline. And part of what I said earlier about saying yes, I said yes before I could really play well enough to be in front of an audience. I said yes just because I wanted that goal, that pressure that would make me stick with it and prove to myself more than anybody that it was doable. And I'll say that it was I was so happy that that happened. I look back on it now and I go, wow, that was a pretty beginner effort, but it meant the world to me. And I've had people who were there who it meant something to. See, here's the thing that I find is the most important out of this. It's not about playing guitar necessarily. It's not about becoming, a one-handed guitar guy. It's more about there is this thing that we, at first glance, say, yeah, can't happen because you can't play guitar with one hand. It's a thing that is a two-handed instrument. And by just doing a little different, I was able to get some music coming out of it. And I think that becomes true for lots of people in lots of things. There's things that everybody gets presented with that they feel that perhaps they can't pursue, perhaps it's too difficult or just not possible. It's just, I'm not built for that. And I just want people to think, hey, you know what? I would have said that about playing guitar with one hand, but I saw this guy and he played guitar with one hand and it sounded okay. And if that helps encourage them to not just automatically say no to this next thing in their life, but to give it an honest chance and say, hey, maybe I need to reframe it. Maybe I need to look at it a little differently. Maybe I need to approach it a little differently. But if I can go at this thing with a renewed sense of it's possible. We probably all have learned in one way or another in our lives about the value of hope. And that hope is what keeps us going. It's what drives us towards accomplishing these things that we need to accomplish, that we want to accomplish, that matter to us. And whether it just means something to me sitting here at home in my guitar room, or whether it can mean something to people that I would speak to at an event. In the end, I just have to get better and better at doing this for me, and hopefully somebody else can benefit from it. As Cheryl said at the beginning, I get to speak at a lot of conferences and events, and they're so enjoyable. They're all a little different. And what I realize is that people that come to those things all come with a certain, whatever their life has taught them and whatever they bring with them. And we can all get together around music. Music makes such a huge difference. She mentioned the Awesome Music Project that I was involved with. I just happened to be speaking at an event at a university nearby, and some people happened to be in the audience that were part of this charity, and they just asked me if I would do their event, and I said yes. And then that led to other events where just saying yes, yes, yes all the time, not thinking, oh, what's in it for me? What's the payoff? Just to do it is such a huge thing. And saying yes leads to other things, leads to other things, leads to other things. And I found it would be so easy to say, nah, can't do it, I'm tired, or I'm, whatever my internal excuse is. And maybe I shouldn't use the word excuse. It's very valid to say to somebody, hey, I couldn't do this because ... In my case, I can't play guitar because I don't have a working right hand. But by just saying yes and going in with it and saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know what it's going to turn out like. I don't know what's the outcome is going to be. I just want to do it. And I found that has been one of the best, I'd say best lessons that's ever come out of this for me, is because I don't know that I always did that. I think there's certain parts of your personality that change and change for the better. You know, I would say I'm way more empathetic, way more put myself in somebody else's shoes as a result of experiencing a stroke. Let me jump back to that. I should have said this in the beginning. That's one of those things that means so much to me. I use the word experienced a stroke. To me, I don't like the phrase, I suffered a stroke. We hear that a lot, but I don't like that. It sounds too negative, too victim-like, too just negative to me. I don't like to use, I have a stroke, because that sounds a little light. Stroke's a pretty serious thing. And saying I had a stroke is like, I had a coffee this morning, I had a nice weekend. We use it very casually. A stroke is a pretty serious thing. So I prefer to say I experienced a stroke, and that is a experience that started on that day that I described to you nearly 13 years ago now, to this very day. This is still part of that experience. And my life wouldn't be the same. And I can honestly say I've had experiences that have been unbelievably, like, just fantastic, that would never, ever have happened had I not experienced a stroke. And it's still a matter of how I looked at things, how I approach things. And I think that's a very valuable approach for other people as well. I've been talking for a while here. I'm going to play maybe a little bit more. This song I haven't played in a while, so I'm going to give it a shot. It's called On the Other Hand. Again, one of those expressions, on the other hand, it's what happens.
And the last bit that you played, it was really quiet. Is there any way that we're able to turn that up a little bit?
And we, of course.
All righty, thank you.
So the whole playing was quiet?
Some of it was really clear, but a lot of it was quiet. And I know when we sound checked, everything was good, but
How's
that
that?
sounds good on my end. I'll just, yeah, that sounds okay on my end.
Okay. There we go.
Fantastic.
So are we going to go to some questions in that, Cheryl?
We certainly can. I've been writing notes and but we will address the questions first. Any warning signs or symptoms of the stroke beforehand?
The nothing that made me feel like, oh, this is something serious. Like I had maybe some tingling in my fingers that I don't know if that was some kind of sign or not, and just kind of some numbness in my fingers, especially. But that was kind of it. I was a guy that, I'd have headaches fairly regularly, and um, in hindsight, didn't realize that that was likely caused by high blood pressure. That was, you know, making its presence known. But again, it's nothing serious enough that makes you go alarm bells. Just felt typical.
Okay. They're all great questions. Was it only an outpatient that you switched from step up goals to long term or back to baseline as a goal?
Um, I would say certainly in the hospital, I kept my sight very short. My distance, let's say, there were not long-term goals at all. Everything was short-term, immediate, today, tomorrow. That was it. Maybe um, next week, but that super clear. And then when I got into outpatient rehab, because I was back into home life, which again looked different, but it was establishing some kind of regularity, that I started to think further into the future. I mean, clearly guitar, when you can't walk and talk clearly and you can't feed yourself and you can't do all kinds of things, then playing guitar isn't at the top of the list. It's going to take a while. And so it was, you're right. When I got into outpatient rehab, then some of those things, those longer term, bigger goals became more relevant. That's a great question. I never thought of that. Made me think there. Made me think.
Yeah. Uh, Physical issues returned, for example, strength on both sides. So I think they're asking, have you recovered fully?
Okay, so certainly not. Um, I've had full sensation on my right side pretty much after a few weeks that was restored. But my right arm, I have very little control over. My right hand, I have even less control over. I can't actively open it. I can close it like intentionally, but then it's just closed and I can't open it again. I have to, wait for it to relax and maybe pull it open with my other hand. My right leg, it's again, I can walk. I can walk without a cane, without a walker, or without whatever. I can, do stairs holding onto handrails, but I wear a device on my leg that is an FES device that um, allows my foot to raise so I don't trip over. It's a drop foot kind of treatment. Um, Electronic device that I found out about through another guy that was in the hospital at the same time as me. And he said, "Hey, you should check this out." And I did, and it's made a huge difference in my life. So definitely without that, having drop foot, it'd either be some kind of brace, AFO, some kind of device, or this electronic thing, which has worked for me.
Fantastic. Do you have any memory issues, and does music help with that?
Man, the questions are
We
fantastic.
have
Oh
good
my
questions,
God.
yes.
Fantastic question. Um, so I've never been a good name person. For some reason, I just always looked at people who could remember people's names after they met them for 1 second. And they just turn around and they knew the person, and they would see them 6 months later and they repeated their name. I was never that guy. Now I'm probably even less that guy. So in terms of memory, I definitely would notice that with names, especially. Um, but other things are fine. Um, Music is incredible. Actually, it's funny you mention it because, again, these questions, what I love about them is I've never thought of these before. And they make you think, you go, yeah, music, I definitely have um, a good slash great. I don't want to be bragging, but musical memory. So I can listen to songs that I grew up with, and every subtle thing I know. The What does the guitar do? What's the bass player doing? What are the words? What's the way that they sing that second line? What's the who was the artist? What was the album? When did it come out? All those kind of things. I remember all that stuff. Great. These days, I'm not loading it with so many memories, and it's funny too. And now that I think of it, we use our phone a lot to be our artificial memory, with taking notes on my phone, photographs, videos, whatever else. And so I've kind of, and maybe everybody's like this, I don't know, but it kind of let yourself off the hook of having to remember things because you can just put enough of a memory tag in there that'll help you find something, and the phone does it all for you. So, but I'm sure that music has a direct impact on memory. I was at an event. Um, I'll just pull out a book here. If you see this, it's called Reverberation. Um, and this is a book about the intersection of music and neuroscience. And it's a fantastic book. If you get a chance, I don't get any money out of it, but I loved it. And it's a it talks about how neuroscientists have looked at how music impacts many aspects of our life. And I'm certain if I went through it again with an eye towards looking at memory things, it's likely in there. Um, because um, I look at things like, if I can throw a little story in here, um, my my mother and father lived in a seniors residence towards the end of their lives, and my mom played guitar there for the residents. They would have these music nights, and she would play guitar, and this other woman would play piano. And these people, some of whom had even lost their ability to speak, they had lost a lot of memory of many things in their lives. As soon as they heard those tunes, every word came back to them. They would start singing it. And if they couldn't sing, you would see their lips moving to form the words. And I knew these people, and I knew what their capability was. And I saw music making a huge difference right there in front of my eyes. It was astounding. The woman on piano, she she had very little short-term memory. Like, she would forget things immediately. But you'd tell her to play a song that she grew up playing, instantly she would play the most beautiful piano arrangement of that song, um, like, just incredibly. So I've seen music work with memory. I've seen music work with language. People relearning how to speak. They learned how to sing their words first. Um, astounding to see that there's so many things that music can have an impact on. Man, don't get me started. Well, you already did, but I could keep going. I could keep going.
Ken, you're a breath of fresh air and a great peer to have. How did you deal with loss of identity of your old self?
I guess that, okay, so one thing was my job, because our job is part of our identity, especially in your 40s, right? You're still in the working world. And I had my wife bring my computer to the hospital. I wrote, I did some computer programming stuff as part of my job. And I just had my computer, did a little test for myself to see if I still kind of got that. Because I realized that part of my thinking might have gone. And so I did a little test early on in the hospital. And I could do it, and it made sense to me. So I just gave my computer back and said, okay, we'll get to this later. Like that, as long as I know it's there, I'm fine. And so really, other than that, like it really becomes, I think, a sense of how we view our identity to start with, because really it's our personality, our viewpoints on things, our taste, our values, all that kind of stuff. And that didn't change. None of that did. So I didn't really lose myself. I lost some capability and I've got some things that don't work the way they used to, but that doesn't define me. That's just things. And I'm sure to some extent, as everybody grows older, certain capabilities decline. That doesn't change who that person is. That's not their identity. So to me, I didn't feel a real loss there. I just felt like this is who I am. This is what I got. This is what I can give. And I'm okay with that.
Fantastic. You had spoke about John Gomes at the beginning,
Yeah.
and somebody is looking for the correct spelling of the last
Yes.
name.
Okay. So his first name is Jon. So he's a Jon, John. And his last name is Gomm.
Okay.
If you look for a song called Passion Flower, that was the one that got me when I first became aware of him. So yeah, so
Okay.
John Gomm,
Okay.
amazing guy. Yeah.
Fantastic.
We actually became friends afterwards. Um, I so enjoyed his work.
Okay, that's fantastic. Um, for your hand and arm, have you tried electrical stim?
Yeah, I have tried. I got myself involved again. This whole thing about saying yes. I got myself involved in a few different trials for different technologies, for different studies that were looking to um, improve our upper extremity capabilities. And for me, I didn't get the value that I would have hoped. Typically, what happens in those cases for me is I would try it, but the amount of effort, the amount of focus, the amount of all that kind of stuff that was involved would leave me with no energy left to do anything else. And so, it truly, not that those things may not have worked in the longer term, but I had to make the choice for me to say that level of investment of my certain kind of finite amount of energy that I have, I would have to give it all to that type of attempt at therapy. And I have nothing left for the rest of my life to, and so I had to make that choice to say, it's not for me. And my effort and energy was better put into becoming better at living with one hand. So
It
again,
makes
not everybody's approach, but that's how it worked out for me.
prioritizing.
Yep.
I like it. I like it. Um, Van Halen tap. Do you use that style?
Well, because I mean Van Halen, he's typically got a lot of right hand, like stuff tapping on this. So like definitely I can do like the left hand stuff, right? Because there's a oh, I turn myself off. Like certainly the left hand part of it, like that's entirely what I'm doing. So it's um so I can play stuff with that one hand. I wish. I love a lot of the, especially the early Van Halen stuff. I love it so much. But again, all of that music that I've learned and loved over the course of my life is in my head, and it somehow becomes part of what comes out in the end. So as much as I can't do specifically Van Halen type of tapping, um, I think somewhere in my head that music is there and it's kind of eking its way out however it does.
There's a lot more information, or there's a lot more interest in the FES device for your leg.
Oh,
Um,
so
I
are you
can,
okay talking about specific products and stuff?
they just want more information on it.
Yeah. So
And that, they can certainly speak to healthcare providers as well for that.
yeah. So basically it's a cuff that clasps around my leg just below my knee. And that's all it is. There's no additional parts. There's nothing else. It's just this cuff. It's got one AA battery that lasts about a month. So I have to change that every month. It has these gel kind of electrodes inside the cuff that make contact with my leg at very specific points. So I had a professional, we kind of worked through where my specific nerves are located so he could locate those electrodes. Um, and that's kind of it. So I strap it on in the morning, go about my day, and it basically, you can feel a little kind of thing every time you take a step. And it basically does this thing where when your leg passes a certain angle, it recognizes that you're about to take a step, and it then fires off the necessary stimulation to that nerve to lift my foot up to prevent me from tripping over my own toes. So that's really what it is.
Very interesting. I haven't heard of that either. Your daily tasks, do you write a list of tasks or a day list of tasks to keep track of?
I wish I could be better at that. I like definitely things like this event. I will have done some stuff to set up the room and set up my guitar and test things and that. So I know there's a certain list of things I have to go through to make sure that I'm prepared for this day. Making notes and stuff like that and looking at timing and whatever, getting my water bottle filled, which I now need to jump to. But I think on a day-to-day basis, I don't have I woke up this morning and I must do this, unless it's an event that's happening that day. Some things I can just kind of know they're there in the back of my mind and I'll get to them when I get to them. So there's kind of both sides of it. I'm not so strict about it.
Are you aware of any programs that support individuals with a brain injury with music?
I think in general, my experience, my exposure has been that they tend to be one-on-one things.
Okay.
I've worked in conjunction with some therapists in the US with their clients. So they'll reach out to me and say, hey, can you work with me with my client who wants to get back into playing guitar again? Because it's so specific. We don't know what capability does the person have beforehand, like just musically, what was their experience, what was their capability, what what's their musical knowledge, what's their everything. So it's so specific that you really have to look at it. What I did, my early days, I'll tell you a couple things, a couple people that I found out since I developed my own way of playing. There's a guy in Michigan who's a one-handed bass player who lost his right arm in an accident. I have another friend in Chile who's a one-handed guitar player who, again, he lost his arm quite early in his life. And he's an amazing guitar player, really super guy. And so I found out about these people afterwards. And you just kind of look at what, people put things online. I put videos online more just so that people can see it. And if they can take something away from it, fantastic. Um, it's not saying that's exactly how you have to do it, because I developed my own way of playing, and it's not like any of those other two guys, but they're doing a great job. I have a friend that's in Scotland, just put out his first song post-stroke. He's been a year post-stroke, and fantastic playing. Very different than me, because he lost use of his left hand, so he has to do one-handed playing the other way, which is an entirely different thing. So definitely, I don't know if there's any standardized, here's how you play one-handed guitar. It tends to be so individual, which makes it cool.
Yeah.
Which makes it very cool, because then it's you, it's your thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. With short-term memory loss, how can I remember a chord I intend to forget where to place my fingers? That's a tricky one.
Yeah, I never, I don't have any experience with that, but my gut says that because it's, again, I'm no professional in this regard, but I tend to have found that our memory related to music seems to be so separate from our memory for other things. And so when I go, I'm not thinking about it. My fingers are just moving because I've done it that way 1,000 times, right? And so, but if I had to think, okay, this is my approximation of, that's D minor for me. This is B flat major. I don't think of that. I just think of, I hear more than I think notes in music. I just hear where it's going to go next. I don't know if that helps at all. It's a real challenge for sure. Even playing guitar when I was younger, and I had to learn chords. I'd be like, okay, there's a D chord, there's an A minor chord, there's an E minor chord, there's like, I had to learn all those things, and it took a while. And add short-term memory to that, short-term memory issues, it could be challenging. I don't know. Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and I wish whoever asked that, I wish them all the best with that, because music is such a huge thing. Yeah.
There was a comment that FES is something that can be introduced to a client by an OT or PT. So if you are interested in this, you're encouraged to reach out to a neuro OT or PT, or look for one in your province, an organization in your province. Back to the question about brain injury and music therapy. Somebody's posted a few different links, so I will get those links out to everybody tomorrow, just to kind of take a look at through what they have. And it doesn't look like there's anything else in the Q&A, but I did have just a couple of things that you said that kind of really struck me. The first one was that you described having a stroke like going off of a cliff. And I had never really thought of it that way, but I'm sure that that could have probably resounded a lot with our audience today. So just the way you said it. And the other thing that I really liked was that you experienced a stroke. And that is something that, we've talked about a lot. And, stroke survivor, experienced a stroke. But when you said that that I had a stroke was too light, that it was like I had a cup of coffee this morning, that kind of really resounded. I thought that makes a lot of sense. You're not too heavy, you're not too light. I experienced a stroke. So just your terminology and the way you're putting things today is very refreshing, I think. And, we had talked about hope, we had talked about reframing, and that is exactly what you have done with your experience, for sure.
Yeah,
So,
I would just say one other thing on that experience thing. how we talk to ourselves, the words that we use when we reference things, I think is a huge value. We don't realize how valuable that is. So I think using the right words is has a value beyond what we even imagine.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. This has been a fantastic experience. This recording will be available to everybody out here. This will be available usually the beginning of next week. It'll be available. I will send a link out tomorrow with all of the links that were talked about in the question and answer today. I will send those out tomorrow. And I think that's it. So thank you very much for giving us your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.